The sound came first, before consciousness, before fear. Hooves, hundreds of them moving in a synchronized circle that made the desert floor tremble like a war drum beating against Samuel Bridger's chest. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of his cabin, and his hand found the Winchester rifle leaning against the wall before his mind fully registered what was happening. It was instinct, honed by 12 years of living alone in Apache country, 12 years of knowing that survival often came down to the difference between waking fast and waking dead. Through the gap in the wooden shutters, Sam could see the first gray hints of dawn bleeding into the Arizona sky. It was June 15, 1892, and the temperature outside was already climbing toward what would be another brutal 112 degrees by noon. But the heat wasn't what made his blood run cold. Surrounding his small adobe cabin in 3 perfect concentric circles were Apache warriors. Sam started counting them the way he'd count heads of cattle, methodically forcing his racing heart to slow. 20 in the first group, 20 more. He stopped when he reached 420. 420 painted faces, 420 drawn bows, 420 reasons why a 40-year-old widower who'd spent the last 9 years trying to forget the world might not see tomorrow. Sam was no stranger to danger. He'd homesteaded this land since 1880, back when he was 28, and still believed that Arizona territory offered men like him a second chance. He'd defended his farm against raids fought alongside his neighbors when Apache war parties came down from the mountains looking for horses and supplies. He'd even killed men, though the memory sat in his gut like swallowed stones, heavy and indigestible. But he had never in 12 years of frontier living seen anything like this. This wasn't a raid. Raiders came fast and loud, hit their targets, and vanished into the canyons before the cavalry could respond. This was something else entirely. This was ceremony. This was judgment. The warriors sat motionless on their Mustang ponies, their war paint fresh and stark in the growing light. Red ochre and black charcoal streaked across faces that showed no emotion, no hurry, no mercy. Some held bows with arrows already knocked, the sinew strings drawn halfway back, ready to release at a signal Sam couldn't predict. Others carried lances decorated with eagle feathers that moved slightly in the hot wind, and on some of those lances Sam could see scalps, dark hair matted with dried blood. His cabin was nothing impressive. 16 feet by 20 adobe walls, 18 inches thick to keep out the heat. One window with iron bars he'd forged himself. A door made of oak wood reinforced with iron straps. Inside a cot, a table, a cast iron stove, and shelves holding canned goods and ammunition. No photographs, no reminders. Sam had put those away 9 years ago, tucked them in a trunk he never opened, because looking at Margaret's face, at the life they'd planned together, was like pressing on a wound that refused to heal. He grabbed his Winchester, a Model 1873 that fired .44 caliber rounds. 28 bullets in the wooden box beside his bed. Against 420 warriors, the mathematics of survival were brutally simple. Even if every shot found its mark, even if he was the best marksman in Arizona territory, he'd be dead before he emptied the rifle twice. But Sam's eyes kept returning to the center of the formation, to the woman seated on a painted horse between 2 massive warriors. He recognized her immediately, even though he'd only seen her once before, just yesterday. It was the woman whose travois he'd fixed. Her name, he would learn, was Nai. But in that moment, with dawn breaking and death circling his home, he knew her only as the stranger he'd stopped to help on his ride back from Wilcox. She'd been kneeling beside a broken travois, her hands working at a shattered crossbeam, with the focused intensity of someone who believed willpower alone could mend wood. The heat that afternoon had been crushing, the kind that made breathing feel like labor, that turned the air into visible shimmers above the desert floor. Sam should have kept riding. That's what men did out here. They minded their business, kept their heads down, survived. The Arizona Territory of 1892 wasn't a place for good Samaritans. It was a place where kindness could get you killed, where stopping to help a stranger might mean never making it home. But something about the way she worked silent and determined in the middle of nowhere had made Sam pull his Appaloosa to a stop. Maybe it was the memory of Margaret, who'd died trying to bring their child into the world, who'd suffered for 18 hours while Sam held her hand and felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. Maybe it was guilt over the Apache he'd killed 5 years earlier when he'd joined the settler militia to defend his neighbor's farm. Maybe it was just loneliness, 9 years of it so deep and so complete that even a brief encounter with another human being felt like water in the desert. He'd dismounted without a word, his boots crunching against the cracked earth, and walked over to examine the damage. The crossbeam of her travois had split clean through, probably from hitting a rock or a gopher hole. Without it, the wooden frame was useless, unable to carry whatever supplies she'd been hauling behind her horse. She'd looked up at him then, and Sam had seen her eyes. Dark, unreadable, framed by loose strands of black hair that had escaped her braid. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with chunks of turquoise that caught the afternoon light like pieces of captured sky. The turquoise alone Sam had thought would be worth a month's wages back in Wilcox. That should have been his first clue that she wasn't just anyone, but he'd been focused on the repair. He'd gestured to the broken travois, a silent offer of help. She'd considered him for a long moment, her gaze measuring him the way a person might measure a tool, checking for flaws, for weaknesses, for reliability. Then she'd stepped back, giving him space to work. Sam had pulled an ironwood piece from his saddlebag, a spare he kept for emergencies. Ironwood was dense and strong, the desert's answer to oak, and it would hold better than the original pine. He'd used rawhide strips to bind it, the same technique his father had taught him back in Tennessee before the war, before everything changed. Wet the rawhide, wrap it tight, let it dry in the sun. As it dried, it would shrink, creating a grip as strong as iron. The whole repair took 18 minutes. He'd timed it by the sun's movement across the sky, an old habit from his farming days when every hour of daylight mattered. She'd watched every movement, not with gratitude, but with that same intense focus, as if she were memorizing every cut, every knot, every decision he made. It had unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. When he'd finished, she'd tested the travois, rolling it back and forth, checking the repair, with the thoroughness of someone whose life might depend on equipment not failing. She'd given a single nod. No smile, no thank you. Just that one gesture of acknowledgement. Then she'd climbed onto her horse, taken the reins, and driven off without looking back. The entire exchange had lasted maybe 20 minutes, and Sam had thought nothing more of it. Just another moment in a long string of moments that made up his quiet, solitary life. He'd returned to his cabin, unsaddled Copper, his Appaloosa, and eaten a cold supper of beans and salt pork. He'd cleaned his Winchester, lit his kerosene lamp, and tried to read a 3-year-old farmer's almanac until his eyes grew heavy. Then he'd lain down on his cot and fallen asleep to the sound of wind scraping against the wooden walls. But before sleep had claimed him completely, he'd done something he always did. He'd walked the perimeter of his cabin, checking for tracks, for signs of visitors, for threats. It was a habit left over from his homesteading days when Apache raids were common and staying alert meant staying alive. That night he'd found something that made his stomach clench. Fresh hoof prints. Dozens of them. Unshod horses the way Apache rode, leaving distinctive tracks in the sand. They'd been positioned in the mesquite bushes about 200 yards from where he'd helped the woman. At least 12 to 15 horses based on the depth and spread of the prints. They'd been watching him, watching her, watching the entire encounter. Sam had stood there in the darkness, his heart beginning to race, understanding dawning like cold water down his spine. The woman hadn't been alone. She'd never been alone. The broken travois, the vulnerable position, the timing. It had all been staged. He'd loaded his Winchester, then checked that his Bowie knife was sharp, and placed the rifle within arm's reach of his bed. If they came for him that night, he'd at least make them work for it. But the night had passed in oppressive silence, the kind of quiet that feels more threatening than noise, and when dawn came with the sound of 400 hooves, Sam understood that they'd been waiting for something more than just darkness. Now standing in his cabin with his rifle in hand and death circling outside, Sam watched as the warrior on the left side of the woman dismounted. He was massive, easily 6'2" and 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. 3 thick red stripes of war paint cut across his face in parallel lines. His chest was bare despite the morning chill revealing scars that mapped a lifetime of combat. A headdress of eagle feathers marked him as someone important, a chief or a war leader. The warrior walked forward with the measured pace of someone who owned the ground beneath his feet, who'd never questioned his right to be exactly where he was. He stopped 20 paces from Sam's cabin door and drove his lance into the earth with enough force to make the decorated shaft quiver. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silence in a language Sam didn't understand. The words were sharp, formal, rhythmic. They sounded like a declaration being read aloud, like charges being brought before a court. When the warrior finished, he stepped back and waited, his eyes fixed on the cabin door with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Sam's mind scrambled for meaning. Was that a challenge? A warning? An invitation to surrender? He had no context, no translator, no way to navigate whatever protocol was unfolding in front of him. His isolation, which had always felt like protection, now felt like a death sentence. He was completely alone, completely unprepared, completely at the mercy of people whose language he didn't speak and whose customs he didn't understand. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning chill. Sweat ran down Sam's spine and soaked into his shirt. The warriors remained locked in position, their painted faces expressionless, their weapons ready but not raised in immediate threat. They were waiting for something, waiting for him to do something. But what? Then the woman made a gesture. It was small, almost imperceptible. She raised her right hand, palm facing outward, and held it there for 3 heartbeats before lowering it again. Immediately, 10 warriors dismounted. They walked forward in synchronized steps, their movements as coordinated as soldiers on a parade ground, and formed a semicircle around Sam's cabin entrance. Each one carried a bow with an arrow already nocked. They didn't aim at the door. They simply stood there, a wall of muscle and intent. This was escalation. Whatever they were waiting for Sam's time to provide, it was running out. But what did they want? For him to come outside, to speak, to fight, to surrender. He considered his options, knowing that each one led to a different kind of death. If he opened the door, he might be shot before he could explain himself. If he stayed inside, they might torch the cabin or simply wait him out until thirst or hunger forced his hand. There was no good move, only varying degrees of bad. His eyes returned to the woman. She was watching the cabin with that same unreadable expression from yesterday. No anger, no impatience, just a steady, unwavering focus that suggested she would sit there for days if necessary. Who was she? The question burned in Sam's mind. Yesterday she'd seemed like a traveler in distress. Now she commanded hundreds of warriors with the authority of someone born to it. The turquoise jewelry, the decorated clothing, the placement at the front of the formation. All of it pointed to status Sam hadn't recognized. He'd helped someone important. That much was clear. But important enough to bring an army. Important enough to orchestrate whatever this ceremony or trial or judgment was. The massive warrior who'd spoken earlier raised his hand. The 10 men around the cabin lifted their bows in perfect unison, arrows now aimed directly at Sam's door. Not at the window where he stood, but at the entrance itself. The message was unmistakable. Come out now. Sam's heart slammed against his ribs. His choices had narrowed to one. He could die inside like a cornered animal, or he could step outside and face whatever waited for him. Neither option offered hope, but at least one offered dignity. He lowered the Winchester and leaned it against the wall. His hands shook as he moved toward the door, every instinct screaming at him to barricade himself inside, to make them work for his life. But something deeper, something he couldn't name, told him that hiding would be the worst choice he could make. He remembered Margaret's last words spoken through gritted teeth as the pain of childbirth overwhelmed her. Pride kills Samuel. Humility saves. She'd been talking about accepting help from the midwife, about letting go of control, but the words had stayed with him long after she was gone. His fingers closed around the door handle. The metal was hot from the sun, almost too hot to touch. He took one breath, then another. Through the gaps in the wood he could see the arrows pointed at him, steady as iron, held by hands that wouldn't tremble even if he begged for mercy. He pulled the door open and stepped into the light. The sunlight hit him like a physical force, so bright after the dimness of his cabin that he had to squint. He stood in the doorway unarmed, exposed to 400 warriors whose collective attention felt heavy enough to crush him. The 10 men with drawn bows didn't flinch. Their arrows remained trained on his chest, steady as stone. The massive warrior stepped forward. Up close, he was even larger than Sam had estimated, with scars that crossed his bare chest in patterns that told stories Sam couldn't read. The red paint on his face made his eyes seem darker, harder, like chips of obsidian. He stopped 3 paces away and spoke again in that same formal tone, the words incomprehensible, but the rhythm suggesting a question being asked. Sam spread his hands slowly, palms outward, showing he carried no weapon. He kept his voice level, though his throat was dry as sand. "I don't understand what you're saying." The warrior's expression didn't change. He repeated the question slower this time, each syllable deliberate, and waited. When Sam still showed no comprehension, the warrior turned and gestured toward the woman. She dismounted with fluid grace and walked forward, the warriors parting for her without needing instruction, creating a path through their ranks. As she approached, Sam noticed details he'd missed yesterday. The intricate beadwork on her vest, each pattern telling a story he couldn't read. The silver bands around her wrists hammered flat and engraved with symbols. The way every man present seemed to track her movement with reverence, with the kind of respect reserved for royalty or prophets, or people who held the power of life and death in their hands. She stopped beside the large warrior and studied Sam with those same unreadable eyes. Then she spoke, and her voice carried an accent, but the words were English. "He asks if you knew who I was when you stopped yesterday." The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Sam's mind raced. This was a test. The wrong answer could mean his life, but he had no idea what the right answer was supposed to be. He chose the only thing he had left. The truth. "No," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I saw someone who needed help." She translated his words to the large warrior. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around them, some of the mounted warriors shifted in their saddles. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. The woman spoke again. "He asks why you helped me without asking my name or my people." Sam took a breath. "Because it didn't matter. A broken wheel is a broken wheel," she translated. This time the large warrior's reaction was more visible. His eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a glance with the woman that Sam couldn't interpret. Agreement, suspicion, anger. The warrior spoke again, longer this time, his tone harder. The woman turned back to Sam, and for the first time he saw something complex in her expression. Not quite anger, but not forgiveness either. Something caught between those two poles. "I am Nai," she said, her voice formal now, as if reading from a script that had been written long before Sam had ever stopped to help her. "I am the daughter of Chief Cochillo." She gestured to the massive warrior beside her, the man whose war paint and bearing suddenly made terrible sense. "This is my father. You touched the travois of a chieftain's daughter without permission. You placed your hands on property that belongs to our people. This is a violation that demands an answer." Sam's stomach dropped through the floor. A chieftain's daughter. That explained everything. The numbers, the ceremony, the careful protocol. He'd stumbled into something far more serious than a simple act of kindness. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I meant no disrespect. I didn't know. What you would have done does not matter." Nai interrupted, her voice remaining calm, but her eyes holding something he couldn't quite read. "What matters is what you did. You saw a woman alone and vulnerable, and you acted. Some would say this shows character. Others would say it shows arrogance, assuming you had the right to approach. Chief Cochillo spoke again, his tone more demanding now, more insistent. Nai translated, and Sam heard the trap closing around him even before she finished speaking. "My father asks if you would have helped if you knew who I was." It was another snare. If Sam said yes, he admitted he didn't care about their laws. If he said no, he admitted his help was conditional, worth less than genuine kindness. The truth was all he had left, and it wasn't neat or noble or clean. "I don't know," Sam said, meeting Nai's eyes. "I hope I would have, but I can't say for certain." Something shifted in her expression. Was that approval? Sam couldn't be sure. She translated, and Chief Cochillo studied him with new intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. Then the chieftain did something unexpected. He reached to his belt and drew a long knife, its obsidian blade gleaming in the sunlight like captured darkness. He held it up so everyone could see, then drove it into the ground between himself and Sam with a force that made the earth shudder. The gesture sent a ripple through the assembled warriors. Some straightened in their saddles, others exchanged glances. Nai's face remained neutral, but her shoulders tensed in a way that suggested this was significant, that something had just shifted in ways Sam didn't understand. She looked at him, and for the first time since this encounter began, he saw something like concern in her eyes. "My father has made his decision," she said quietly. "You will be tested. If you pass, you will be honored as one who acted with true heart. If you fail, you will answer for the violation with your life." The words landed like stones. Sam's pulse hammered in his ears. What kind of test? Nai glanced at the knife standing upright in the dirt, then back at Sam. The kind that proves whether your actions yesterday were guided by courage or foolishness. She paused, and in that pause Sam heard the weight of everything unsaid. The kind that few men survive. Chief Cochillo spoke again, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors with the weight of formal pronouncement. Nai listened without expression, then turned back to Sam, and he could hear the shift in her tone from translator to something closer to guide or perhaps witness. "You will ride with us to the sacred grounds," she said. "There you will face 3 challenges. The first tests your body, the second tests your mind, the third tests your heart. Survive all 3, and my people will know you acted with honor. Fail any one of them, and you will not leave that place." Sam's mouth went dry, and not just from the desert heat. "How far are these sacred grounds?" "Half a day's ride." Nai's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. "We leave now." 2 warriors brought forward a horse, a strong grulla mustang with intelligent eyes and a coat the color of storm clouds. They handed Sam the reins but no bridle. He would ride as they did with only his legs and balance to guide the animal. Another test before the tests even began, a way to measure whether this white man who'd fixed a travois knew anything about horses beyond hitching them to wagons. Sam mounted carefully, remembering the techniques he'd learned during his first year's homesteading back when breaking horses was cheaper than buying them already trained. He approached from the left, kept his movement smooth and confident, placed his hand on the horse's withers to feel its tension. The grulla shifted beneath him, testing his weight, judging whether this rider was worth obeying. Sam kept his breathing steady, and his hands light on the animal's mane, using his knees to communicate rather than force. Around him the warriors watched every movement. He saw a few nods, barely perceptible, the first small acknowledgments that maybe this white man wasn't completely useless. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't contempt either, and in his current situation Sam would take what he could get. Cochillo gave a sharp command. The formation shifted with practiced precision, warriors surrounding Sam on all sides, boxing him in so completely that escape would be impossible, even if he'd been foolish enough to try. Nai rode at the front beside her father, her back straight, and her gaze fixed ahead, giving Sam no indication of what awaited him or how she felt about any of this. They moved as one, hundreds of horses, creating a sound like distant thunder. The dust they raised formed a cloud that turned the sun hazy and coated Sam's throat. No one spoke. The silence felt intentional, heavy with judgment, as if every warrior was using these hours to decide whether the man riding in their midst deserved what was coming, or whether mercy might somehow slip into the equation. Sam's mind raced as they rode. What kind of challenges awaited him? Physical tests he could understand. Strength, endurance, pain, tolerance. These were things a man could prepare for, could steel himself against. But tests of mind and heart. How did you measure those? How did you pass or fail something so subjective? And what did it mean that no man over 35 had passed all three, according to that old warrior who'd spoken up earlier? He studied the warriors around him, trying to read something in their faces. Their war paint made them look inhuman, like spirits or demons from the stories his mother used to tell back in Tennessee. But underneath the paint, they were just men. Some were young, barely old enough to grow beards, their eyes still holding that mix of eagerness and uncertainty that marked inexperience. Others bore scars that mapped decades of survival, deep lines cut into weathered skin that told of battles won and brothers lost. All of them moved with the fluid confidence of people who'd spent their lives on horseback, who were more comfortable astride a moving animal than standing still on solid ground. Sam had grown up on a farm, had learned to ride out of necessity, but watching these warriors he understood the difference between someone who rode horses and someone who lived with them, who thought in terms of the animal's rhythm and breath. The landscape changed as they traveled. The flat desert gave way to rising hills covered in scrub brush and twisted mesquite trees. Rock formations jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and the air grew thinner, harder to pull into his lungs. Sam's shirt was soaked through with sweat, and the grulla beneath him was breathing harder, though the animal showed no signs of slowing. After 2 hours of riding, Nai dropped back from the front and positioned her horse alongside Sam's. She rode in silence for several minutes, her eyes scanning the horizon in that constant way of people who'd learned to watch for threats before threats became visible. Finally she spoke, her voice pitched low enough that only Sam could hear. "You wonder why I was alone yesterday?" It wasn't a question, but Sam nodded anyway. "I was being tested as well," she said, still not looking at him. "My father believes I'm too soft, too willing to see good in outsiders. He sent me into the desert alone to learn the dangers of trusting strangers." She glanced at him then, and Sam saw something raw in her expression, something that looked like fear mixed with determination. When you stopped to help, you proved his point. The weight of that revelation settled on Sam's shoulders like stones in a sack. "I made things worse for you." "Yes," Nai said simply, and Sam appreciated the honesty even as it made his chest tighten. "Now I must prove that my judgment was not flawed, that allowing you to help was not weakness." Her jaw tightened. "If you fail these tests, I fail as well. My father will never allow me to speak in council again. I will be married off to strengthen an alliance and forgotten." Sam felt the burden multiply. This wasn't just about his life anymore. Her future hung in the balance alongside his survival, and the unfairness of it made anger flare in his gut. "Why tell me this?" he asked. Nai's eyes met his dark and steady. "Because if you understand what is truly at stake, you will fight harder to survive. And I need you to survive." Before Sam could respond, a shout came from the front of the formation. The warriors ahead had stopped. Between two massive rock formations, Sam could see an opening, a natural gateway carved by water and time that led into a hidden valley. The walls rose at least 180 feet on either side, creating a corridor that felt less like an entrance and more like a throat waiting to swallow him whole. Cochilo raised his hand and the entire group halted. He turned in his saddle and looked back at Sam with eyes that promised nothing but judgment, eyes that had seen too many men fail and felt no pity for any of them. Nai's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We have arrived. Whatever happens next, do not show fear. They will interpret it as guilt." The warriors began moving forward again, funneling through the narrow passage in groups of 20. Sam's horse followed, carrying him toward whatever waited on the other side, and with each step the walls of stone grew higher, blocking out the sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the shadows, and Sam felt the sweat on his skin turn cold. His stomach knotted tighter with each hoofbeat, knowing that whatever was about to happen would determine not just his fate, but Nai's as well. The hidden valley opened before them like a wound cut into the earth. Steep canyon walls rose on all sides, creating a natural amphitheater that trapped sound and heat in equal measure. At the center stood a flat expanse of hard-packed dirt, empty except for 3 wooden posts driven deep into the ground, each one twice the height of a man. Even from a distance, Sam could see the dark stains near the base of the center post, and his mind supplied the explanation he didn't want to acknowledge. Blood. Old blood soaked into wood that had absorbed the suffering of how many men before him. The warriors formed a circle around the perimeter, their horses creating a living barrier. Sam dismounted when the others did, his legs stiff from the ride. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with the weight of countless ceremonies performed in this exact spot. This was sacred ground, and sacred ground had rules he didn't know. Cochilo dismounted and walked to the center of the arena. He spoke in his language, his voice echoing off the stone walls, and the warriors responded in unison, a single word that sounded like acknowledgement and commitment combined. Nai appeared at Sam's side, close enough that he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow despite her controlled expression. "He is telling them why we are here," she said quietly. "That you violated sacred law by touching what belonged to his family. That you will now prove whether your heart is worthy of forgiveness." Sam looked at her profile, at the tension in her jaw. "How many people have stood here before me?" Her silence was answer enough. 3 warriors stepped forward from the circle, each carrying something. The first held a long rope made of braided leather, stained dark with age and use. The second carried a clay vessel sealed with beeswax, its contents unknown. The third held a bundle wrapped in cloth that seemed to move slightly, as if whatever was inside still had life in it. Cochilo gestured to the first warrior, who approached Sam and held out the rope. Nai translated her father's words, and Sam felt his stomach twist with each syllable. "The first test is endurance. You will be tied to the post. You will stand while the sun crosses the sky. You will not sit. You will not lean. You will not call out." She paused, and Sam heard something in her voice that might have been regret. "If you fall before the sun touches the western wall, you fail." Sam looked up. The sun was directly overhead, beating down with the merciless intensity of an Arizona summer noon. That meant hours, maybe 6, standing without support under brutal heat. Men had died from less, and he was 40 years old, not 20. But refusing meant immediate death, while accepting gave him at least a chance. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The warriors moved with efficient brutality. They bound his wrists behind the center post, the leather rope wet and cold against his skin. Sam knew what that meant. As the rawhide dried in the sun, it would shrink, tightening its grip until his hands went numb, and then beyond numb into something worse. They positioned his feet shoulder-width apart and marked the ground around them with white powder lime or gypsum. If he moved his feet from those marks, Nai said quietly, he would fail. Then they stepped back, and Sam was alone in the center of the circle, 400 pairs of eyes watching him with the intensity of people who'd come a long way to witness either justice or entertainment, or perhaps both. The sun felt like it was burning holes through his skull. Within minutes, sweat soaked his shirt. The position forced his chest forward and his shoulders back, making each breath a conscious effort. His arms, pulled backward around the post, began to ache almost immediately, a dull throb that he knew would only intensify as time passed. The warriors watched in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply sat on their horses or stood in place and stared, tracking every twitch, every grimace, every moment of weakness. Sam focused on breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth, trying to establish a rhythm that would carry him through what was coming. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time began to lose meaning under that merciless sun. Sam's legs started to tremble, small shakes at first that he could control, then larger ones that he couldn't. His shoulders screamed for relief, the muscles burning as if someone had poured acid into the joints. The rope around his wrists had cut into his skin, and he could feel blood trickling down his forearms, warm at first, and then sticky as it dried. Through the haze of heat and exhaustion he saw Nai watching from the front of the circle. Her face showed nothing, but her hands gripped her horse's mane so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She needed him to survive this. Her future depended on it, and that thought became an anchor. When his knees threatened to buckle, he remembered her words. "I need you to survive." When the pain in his shoulders turned into fire, he thought about what failure meant, not just for him, but for her. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into what felt like an hour. Sam's vision began to blur at the edges. His mouth was so dry his tongue felt swollen, too large for his mouth. Flies landed on his face and he couldn't brush them away. One crawled across his eyeball, and he had to blink it off, the simple movement feeling like a defeat, even though he hadn't fallen. He saw things that weren't there. Margaret standing in the circle, her belly swollen with the child she'd never deliver, her face pale with the pain that would eventually kill her. He blinked, and she was gone. He saw his unborn son playing in the dust, a boy who would have been 12 now if he'd lived and blinked again, and there was only empty ground. Time collapsed into a single, endless moment of suffering. Sam stopped trying to fight the pain, and instead tried to become it, to surrender to it so completely that there was no separation between himself and the agony. He'd heard about this technique from an old cavalry scout back in Wilcox, a man who'd survived Apache torture and lived to tell about it. "Don't fight the pain," the scout had said. "Flow with it. Become it. It's the resistance that breaks you, not the pain itself." So Sam stopped resisting. He let the pain wash through him like a river, let it fill every space in his body until there was nothing left but the sensation and the stubborn refusal to fall. His breathing synchronized with the slight movement of the post against his back, matching its rhythm, becoming part of the wood and the earth and the burning sun overhead. An old warrior, the same one who'd spoken earlier about being proven, at 23 suddenly stood from where he'd been sitting. He walked to the edge of the arena facing Sam, sat cross-legged in the dirt, and began chanting. The sound was low and rhythmic, wordless, but somehow full of meaning. Within moments, 3 other older warriors joined him, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to fill the canyon. Some of the younger warriors frowned at this shifting uncomfortably. One of them, a man about 28 with an ambitious gleam in his eye, spoke sharply to the old warrior. But the elder ignored him, continuing to chant, and after a moment the younger man fell silent. Sam didn't understand what was happening, but he felt something shift. The chanting wrapped around him like a blanket, not easing the pain but somehow making it more bearable, reminding him that he wasn't entirely alone in his suffering. The shadow of the western wall began its slow creep across the arena floor. Sam watched it with the desperate focus of a drowning man watching a rope being lowered. Inch by inch it moved, thick and slow as honey crawling toward the white marks around his feet. His knees were locked now, locked so tight he wasn't sure he'd ever unlock them. His entire body shook with exhaustion and pain and the massive effort of simply remaining upright. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into a single afternoon, the shadow touched the white powder line. Cochillo stood abruptly. He walked toward Sam with measured steps, and Sam thought, "This is it. This is the moment I learn whether I've succeeded or failed." The chief drew his knife, that same obsidian blade he'd driven into the ground earlier, and Sam's exhausted mind couldn't process what was about to happen. Cochillo raised the knife. For a moment Sam thought he'd misunderstood everything, that this was execution, not test. Then the blade came down and cut through the rawhide ropes in one smooth motion. Sam's arms fell forward, and the relief was so intense it was almost sexual, a rush of sensation that made his vision go white for a moment. His knees unlocked, and his whole body swayed, 400 warriors leaning forward collectively to see if he would fall now after everything in the final moment. Sam locked his knees one more time, locked them with the last reserves of strength he had, and remained standing. Barely. Swaying like a tree in a strong wind. but standing. Cochilo spoke a single word loud enough for everyone to hear. The warriors erupted not with hostility but with something that sounded like approval. They cheered, striking their spear butts against the ground in a rhythmic pounding that made the earth tremble beneath Sam's feet. Even the young ambitious warrior who'd questioned the elders' chanting was striking his spear against the ground, caught up in the collective acknowledgement of what they'd just witnessed. Nai's face flooded with relief so profound she couldn't hide it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall, blinking rapidly to clear them. She translated her father's word, her voice trembling slightly. "You have passed the first test, but understand this. What comes next is harder. The second test does not measure your body. It measures your judgment. And men with strong bodies often have weak minds." Sam was allowed to collapse, though even that was a controlled fall, sitting rather than sprawling, maintaining some shred of dignity. His hands were still bound in front of him, a reminder that he wasn't fully trusted yet. A woman warrior, her face lined with age and wisdom, approached with a leather water skin. She allowed him one small sip, no more, and when he looked at her questioningly, she said something sharp in Apache. Nai translated, "Drink too much too fast, you vomit. Then you fail the next trial." The woman examined Sam's wrists, which were cut deep enough to need attention. She applied a paste that smelled of yarrow and other herbs Sam couldn't identify, then wrapped them in clean cloth. She said nothing, but she nodded once before walking away, and Sam understood that this was respect hard-earned and grudgingly given. Cochilo addressed Sam again, his tone different now, less hostile but no less serious. Nai moved closer to translate. "My father says you have passed the first trial with honor. Your body proved strong enough, surprising for a man of 40 years. She paused, and Sam heard the shift in her tone. "But body is easy, mind is harder. Rest 20 minutes. Then the second trial begins." 20 minutes wasn't enough to recover from 6 hours of torture, and Sam knew that was the point. They were testing whether he could endure again immediately, or whether that first trial had emptied his reserves completely. He sat in the dirt, focusing on breathing, on letting his heart rate slow, on preparing himself mentally for whatever came next. The second warrior stepped forward with the clay vessel. He broke the wax seal with ceremonial care, and a smell wafted across the arena. Water. Fresh, clean mountain spring water. Sam's cracked lips ached at the scent of it. Every cell in his body screamed for moisture, for relief, for the simple mercy of something wet against his parched throat. But as the warrior tilted the vessel and poured its contents onto the thirsty ground where the water vanished in seconds like it had never existed at all, Sam understood with sudden clarity that this was the trap. This wasn't about whether he was thirsty. This was about something else entirely, something deeper and more dangerous than physical need. Nai's voice cut through his confusion. "The second trial is not about pain. It is about choice." She looked at him with those dark eyes that held too much knowledge. "Do you take, or do you give? Choose correctly, and you pass. Choose wrong, and you die. But no one will tell you which is correct." The warrior held the empty vessel toward Sam, offering it in a gesture that seemed simple but carried the weight of life and death. And Sam, exhausted and dehydrated and desperate, had to decide what the right answer was when every instinct in his body was screaming at him to take what was being offered. Sam stared at the empty vessel in the warrior's hands, his mind racing even as his body screamed for water. The clay pot was simple, unadorned, but in that moment it felt like the most important object in the world. His throat was raw, his lips cracked and bleeding. He'd just endured 6 hours under the Arizona sun without a single drop of moisture. Every fiber of his being wanted to reach out and take what was being offered. But something held him back. Some instinct born of watching these people, of understanding that nothing they did was without layers of meaning he couldn't immediately see. He forced himself to think past the desperation, to look beyond the obvious. The warrior stood perfectly still, the vessel extended, waiting. Around him the 400 warriors watched in that same suffocating silence, and Sam realized they weren't just watching him. They were waiting to see if he would understand something fundamental about who they were and what they valued. His eyes scanned the circle of faces. Young warriors sweating in the heat, their horses stamping restlessly. Older men whose weathered skin showed the toll of decades in this brutal climate. They'd all ridden for 4 hours to get here. They'd all sat through 6 more hours in the blazing sun, watching him suffer. And in all that time, Sam realized with dawning understanding he hadn't seen a single one of them drink. 10 hours without water in 100-degree heat. They'd imposed on themselves the same deprivation they'd imposed on him, and they'd done it willingly as part of witnessing his trial. That kind of discipline, that kind of shared sacrifice spoke to something deeper than individual need. It spoke to a culture where the collective mattered more than the individual, where suffering together was more important than personal comfort. Sam thought back to his homesteading days, to the drought of 1881, when wells ran dry and neighbors had to share what little water they had. He remembered one man, a settler named Patterson, who'd hoarded his well water while everyone else shared. Within a month, the community had shunned him, stopped trading with him, left him to fend for himself. Patterson had left Arizona Territory by autumn, driven out not by violence, but by the simple refusal of decent people to associate with someone who thought only of himself. Margaret had taught him something during those hard months. She'd grown up in Tennessee during the war, had seen what happened when communities fell apart, when it became every man for himself. In the desert, she'd told him one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind, water shared his life. Water hoarded is death for everyone. Sam's hand trembled as he reached out, but instead of taking the vessel, he pushed it gently back toward the warrior. His voice came out as a rasp, barely audible. "Give it to them." He gestured with his bound hands to the circle of warriors watching. They rode far. They waited long. Their thirst matters too. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The warrior holding the vessel looked shocked, as if this was not the response he'd expected or perhaps had ever witnessed before. Then a murmur rippled through the assembled warriors like wind moving through grass. Sam watched as some of them nodded slowly, as if confirming something they'd hoped to see but hadn't dared to expect. The old warrior who'd chanted during the first trial struck his chest with his closed fist in a gesture that needed no translation. Others followed suit, even some of the younger warriors who'd seemed skeptical. The sound of fists striking chests created a rhythm that echoed off the canyon walls, and Sam understood that somehow impossibly he'd given the right answer. Cochilo stood and walked toward Sam, studying him with new intensity. When he spoke, his tone had changed, less judge and more teacher, as if Sam had graduated from one category to another in the chief's mind. Nayi translated, and Sam could hear the relief threading through her voice like gold in quartz. "You have proven you understand the second law. A man who thinks only of himself dies alone in the desert. A man who thinks of others first will never thirst because others will remember his sacrifice and care for him in turn." The warrior raised the vessel high so everyone could see, then took a long drink himself. He passed it to the warrior beside him, who drank and passed it on. Sam watched the vessel make the entire circuit, each man taking only 2 or 3 swallows, disciplined even in their thirst, sharing equally until the vessel returned empty to the center of the arena. A different warrior refilled it from a larger water bag and brought it to Sam. This time when it was offered, Sam understood he was allowed to drink. He took 3 careful swallows, fighting the urge to gulp it all down, knowing that restraint mattered as much as the earlier choice. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing he'd ever tasted, and those 3 swallows felt like salvation. Cochilo spoke again, and Nayi's translation carried a warning. "You have passed 2 trials. Body and mind both proved worthy. But the 3rd trial is the one that matters most. It reveals what a man truly values, what he would sacrifice, what lives in his heart beneath all the words and actions." Her voice dropped lower. "Many men have strong bodies. Some have wise minds. Few have pure hearts. And this is where most men fail." The 3rd warrior stepped forward, the one who'd been carrying the cloth bundle. He unwrapped it slowly with the kind of reverence people reserve for sacred objects or the bones of ancestors. Inside was a knife, and even from a distance Sam could see it was extraordinary. The blade was 9 inches of polished obsidian black volcanic glass knapped by a master craftsman into something so sharp it could split hair. The handle was wrapped in soft deerskin, and worked into the wrapping was intricate beadwork, turquoise and red coral and white shell arranged in patterns that told stories Sam couldn't read. The sheath was fringed deerskin painted with symbols, and the whole object radiated the kind of beauty that comes from months or years of painstaking labor. This wasn't a weapon. This was art. This was love made tangible. Cochillo took the knife from the warrior and held it with a tenderness that transformed his face from stone to something achingly human. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, and Sam heard grief in it, old grief that had never fully healed. Naiye translated, and her own voice thickened with emotion as she spoke. This knife belonged to my wife Takchena, Swift Bird. She made it herself over 8 moons obsidian from the sacred quarry 40 miles north, each bead traded from different tribes across hundreds of miles. She made it as a gift for me on our marriage day. I gave it back to her as a gift when Naiye was born, so our daughter would always have something of both of us. Naiye's voice broke slightly, and Sam saw her struggling to maintain composure. 14 winters ago, cavalry raided our winter camp. Buffalo soldiers from Fort Apache coming at dawn when we were sleeping. Takchena was protecting me. I was 14. A soldier shot her and she fell on top of me, shielding me with her body. She died so I could live. This knife is the only thing I have of her. It is her hands, her voice, her love. I would die before losing it. The weight of that story settled over the arena like a shroud. Sam understood now why this was the final test, why this was the one that broke men. This wasn't about right answers or physical endurance. This was about exposing the core of who someone was when everything else was stripped away. Cochillo placed the knife on the ground in front of Sam, the obsidian blade catching the afternoon light. He spoke, and Naiye translated, her voice barely above a whisper now. Yesterday this knife was in my travois. You fixed the travois. You could have seen it, could have taken it. You didn't, but maybe only because you didn't know its value, didn't know who I was or what it meant. The chief's next words felt like a trap closing. So I ask you this, Samuel Bridger, if you had known who Naiye was yesterday, if you had known this knife was there in her travois, would you have helped her? Or would you have taken the knife and left her stranded in the desert? Sam's mind reeled. There was no right answer to this question. If he said he would have helped anyway, they'd call him a liar because men are selfish and everyone knew it. If he said he would have taken the knife, he was admitting to being a thief, someone who preyed on the vulnerable. If he said he didn't know, he was a coward avoiding the question. He thought about his past, about the man he'd been at different times in his life. At 28, newly arrived in Arizona with Margaret and Hope, he'd been generous, idealistic. He'd found a Mexican farmer's lost money pouch, once $35, and returned it without hesitation. But that was before loss, before cynicism, before the world had taught him that kindness was a luxury poor men couldn't afford. After Margaret died, after he'd spent 18 hours watching her suffer through labor that killed both her and their unborn child, Sam had changed. He'd become harder, angrier. 5 years ago, he'd ridden past a settler family being attacked by raiders. He'd heard the shots, seen the smoke, and he'd kept riding because it wasn't his problem, wasn't his fight. He'd learned later that the entire family died, father, mother, 2 children, and Sam had lived with that guilt every day since. 3 years ago, he'd found an abandoned settler wagon, the owners dead or fled, and he'd taken the tools from it. Good tools worth maybe $80, and he'd used them to maintain his farm and hated himself a little more each time he picked up a hammer or saw that had belonged to someone else. So, which Sam would have stopped to help Naiye if he'd known who she was and what she carried? The young idealist, the bitter widower, the guilty coward. Sam honestly didn't know, and that uncertainty was more damning than any lie would have been. He looked at Cochillo, at Naiye, at the circle of warriors waiting for his answer. Then he said the only thing he could say, the only truth that mattered. I cannot answer that question. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Warriors erupted in shouts, some jumping to their feet, hands moving to weapons. The young ambitious warrior Sam had noticed earlier, the one called Kuruk, stepped forward with his hand on his tomahawk. He refuses the question. He admits guilt by silence. Other voices joined in, some angry, some confused, and the careful structure of the ceremony seemed to be collapsing into chaos. Cochillo's face darkened like storm clouds gathering, and Sam knew he was one word away from death. Naiyi looked stricken, her face pale, and Sam saw in her eyes the recognition that she'd gambled everything on him, and he'd just failed her. But Sam kept talking, raising his voice above the chaos, refusing to let them drown him out before he could explain. "I cannot answer, because I will never be that man again. The one who didn't know who you were, who stopped yesterday in ignorance. That Samuel Bridger made a choice based on not knowing the stakes, on not understanding what it meant." The warriors quieted, slightly more confused now than angry, trying to understand what he was saying. Sam pressed on, knowing these might be his last words. "Today I know who Naiyi is. I know about Takchena. I know about this knife. I know what it means to both of you. The Samuel Bridger standing here now is not the same man who stopped yesterday. We're never the same person we were yesterday. Every choice we make, everything we learn, it changes us." He took a breath, his bound hands reaching for the knife on the ground between them. "So, I can't tell you what yesterday's Sam would have done if he'd known about the knife. Maybe he would have taken it. Maybe not. I honestly don't know. And claiming I do would be a lie." Sam picked up the knife, the obsidian blade cold and smooth in his hands. "But I can tell you what today's Sam would do. Knowing everything I know now, knowing who you are and what this means and what's at stake." He held the knife out toward Naiyi, his eyes meeting hers. "I would help you again. I would help you even if it cost my life. Because some things matter more than survival. Because I'm tired of being the man who rides past people in trouble. Because maybe this is my chance to stop living with guilt and start living with purpose." The knife trembled in his outstretched hands. "Take it. It's yours. It was always yours. And if you judge me worthy, if your father judges me worthy, maybe I can finally be the man I should have been 5 years ago when I rode past that family. Maybe I can be someone my wife would have been proud of instead of someone I'm ashamed to remember." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to hold still, as if the entire canyon was waiting to see what would happen next. Sam knelt there with the knife extended, his arms shaking from exhaustion and emotion, knowing he'd either just saved himself or damned himself, and he wouldn't know which until Cochillo decided. Naiyi stepped forward slowly. She took the knife from his hands, her fingers brushing his for just a moment, and Sam saw tears running freely down her face now. She made no attempt to hide them. She turned to her father and spoke in Apache, her voice clear and strong despite the emotion, and whatever she said made several of the older warriors nod thoughtfully. Cochillo took the knife from his daughter and examined it, as if seeing it for the first time, running his fingers over the beadwork that his dead wife had made, remembering things Sam couldn't imagine. When he looked up at Sam, his eyes held something new, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he'd finally seen past the white skin and settler's clothes to something deeper underneath. The chief spoke at length, his words carrying across the valley, and when he finished, several warriors struck their chests again with that same gesture of respect. Naiyi translated, and Sam heard wonder in her voice. "My father says you have answered the question no man has answered correctly. Others have claimed they would help, and we knew they lied. Others have admitted they would steal, and we killed them for honesty without honor. But you said something new, something we have never heard before." She paused, making sure every word carried its full weight. "You said you don't know who you were, but you know who you are. You said we are not prisoners of our past selves, that every sunrise we can choose to be a different man than we were yesterday." Cochillo handed the knife back to Naiyi with a gesture that seemed to carry more meaning than Sam could fully grasp. The chief turned to face the assembled warriors and raised both hands high above his head. He spoke in a voice that rang off the canyon walls like a bell, formal and final, and when he finished, the warriors responded as one. Ho, ho, ho. 3 times they shouted the sacred number, and then they dismounted and struck their spear butts into the ground in a rhythmic pounding that made the earth beneath Sam's feet tremble like a living thing. Nai moved closer to him, close enough that he could hear her whisper beneath the drumming of spears. You have passed all 3 trials. My father declares you proven a man of true heart who acted without knowing the stakes and who would act the same way knowing everything. The relief in her voice was palpable, but Sam could see that her shoulders were still tense, as if she didn't quite believe the ordeal was over. It wasn't. One warrior remained mounted while all the others had dismounted. Kuruk. The ambitious young man who'd questioned the old warrior's chanting sat on his horse with his jaw set and his eyes burning with something that looked like righteous anger. He didn't cheer. He didn't strike his spear against the ground. He simply waited until the celebration died down, and then he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. And he spoke in English, so there could be no misunderstanding. He has passed 3 trials of single moments. But I have a 4th question. The warriors who'd been celebrating fell silent. Cochilo turned slowly to look at Kuruk, his expression unreadable. Nai stiffened beside Sam, and he heard her draw in a sharp breath. This wasn't part of the ceremony. This was something else, something dangerous. Kuruk dismounted with deliberate slowness, making a show of it, and walked toward the center of the arena. He was perhaps 28 years old, powerfully built with combat scars that marked him as someone who'd seen real fighting. His war paint was fresh and aggressive, all sharp angles and harsh lines. Old man Kuruk said his English heavily accented but clear enough. You pass tests of body, mind, and heart, but these tests are for single moments in time, choices made in hours or minutes. I ask about a lifetime. I ask about years of choices, years of actions. He turned to address Cochilo, switching to Apache, but Nai translated in a whisper for Sam's benefit. He's saying we honor this white man, but do we know his past? Do we know what he did before yesterday? Maybe he helps one woman one time, but maybe he killed many Apaches many times before. The murmur that ran through the warriors was different from before. This was uncertainty, doubt creeping back into a situation that had seemed resolved. Sam felt his stomach clench. Kuruk had found the weak point in the armor, the one question that could unravel everything. Kuruk turned back to Sam, and his eyes were hard as flint. Samuel Bridger. You say you are 40 winters old. You say you came to Arizona Territory in 1880. That is 12 years. 12 years during a time of war between our peoples. 12 years of raids and battles and blood. The young warrior's voice grew louder, more challenging. Were you part of settler militia? Did you fight against my people? Did you kill Apache warriors defending their land? He paused, letting the questions hang in the air like smoke. Because if you did, then all these pretty words about kindness and change mean nothing. You are our enemy, and we honor you with the blood of our brothers still fresh on your hands. Sam could have lied. There was no way to verify his past, no records that would prove or disprove what he said. But he'd built his defense in the 3rd trial on honesty, on admitting uncertainty and complexity, and to lie now would destroy everything he'd earned. He met Kuruk's eyes and chose the truth, even knowing it might kill him. Yes, I fought against Apache, not as militia, but as a homesteader defending my land. In 1881 there was a raid on my neighbor's farm. The Williams family. Apache warriors took horses and supplies. Williams fought back, people died. The community formed a group to track the raiders. I was part of that group. The words fell like stones into still water ripples of reaction spreading through the assembled warriors. Some hissed in anger. Others gripped their weapons tighter. The fragile peace that had existed moments ago shattered like glass. We tracked the raiders to a canyon. Sam continued, forcing himself to keep speaking even as he saw hands moving toward knives and tomahawks. There was a fight. Brief, brutal. 3 Apache warriors died. I shot one of them, maybe 2. I'm not certain. It happened fast. Kuruk's face split in a triumphant smile. You hear? He admits it. He killed our brothers, and now we honor him. Now we call him proven. This is betrayal of our dead." Other voices joined in, angry and getting angrier. The careful structure of the ceremony was collapsing, and Sam understood that he was about to die, not in trial but in vengeance, which was perhaps what he'd deserved all along. But Kuruk wasn't finished. He drew his knife, a wicked blade of Spanish steel, and held it high. "I challenge this honor. I demand combat trial, him against me, knives only. If he has a true heart, let him prove it with blood. If I win, he dies as he deserves. If he wins, then maybe he has earned forgiveness for the blood on his hands." Cochilo looked torn, caught between the ceremony he'd just completed and this new challenge he couldn't easily refuse without appearing weak. The chief's eyes moved from Kuruk to Sam and back again, calculating, judging. Finally he looked at Sam and spoke. Nayi translated, her voice tight with worry. "My father asks if you accept this challenge." Sam was exhausted. 6 hours tied to a post, dehydrated, his wrists cut and bandaged, his body pushed beyond its limits. Kuruk was 30 years younger, fresh skilled with a blade and burning with righteous anger. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution with extra steps. "I accept," Sam said quietly. "No." Nayi stepped forward, her composure finally breaking. "This isn't fair. He's exhausted. He's already proven himself." Sam held up a hand to stop her. "Fair. I helped kill his people. This is fair." He looked at Kuruk. "But before we fight, I want to tell a story. About why I was there that day, what happened, and what it made me become. If after hearing it you still want my blood, we fight." Kuruk sneered. "Old man's trick. Stalling for time. No trick, just truth. All of it. The parts that damn me as much as the parts that explain me." Cochilo considered this, then nodded. "Speak. We will listen. Then there will be combat." Sam sat down in the dirt, too tired to stand for this. The warriors formed a tighter circle, and Nayi came to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, a gesture of support she probably shouldn't have made, but did anyway. 1880. Sam began. "I came to Arizona Territory with my wife Margaret. We were poor, desperate for a new start. Tennessee was destroyed by the war, our farm burned. The Homestead Act promised free land if you could improve it, make it productive. 160 acres if you could survive 5 years. He looked around at the faces watching him, some hostile, some curious, all waiting. We didn't know this land was already claimed. We didn't know, or maybe we didn't want to know, that Apache had lived here for 300 years. We just saw empty desert and thought it was ours for the taking because the government said so. The first 2 years were peaceful. We built our cabin, dug a well-planted crops. Corn, beans, squash. Margaret got pregnant in 1882. We were happy, hopeful. We thought we'd found our place in the world. Sam's voice grew rougher, the memories cutting like broken glass. Then came the raid. Summer of 1881. The Williams family, our neighbors 5 miles east. Apache warriors came for horses and supplies. The Apaches had been pushed onto reservations, their hunting grounds taken, their food sources destroyed. They were raiding because they were starving. We didn't think about that then. We just thought they were attacking us. Williams fought back. 2 Apache warriors died in that fight. 1 settler was wounded. The whole community panicked, thought more raids would come. So 20 of us formed a group, tracked the raiders. I was the best tracker among the settlers. I'd hunted my whole life back in Tennessee. I led them to an Apache camp hidden in the mountains. The fight that followed was chaos. The Apache were ready for us, had scouts who'd seen us coming. It wasn't a massacre. It was a battle. 3 Apache died. I shot 1 for certain, maybe wounded another. But 1 of the settlers died too, and 3 more were injured badly enough they never fully recovered. Sam met Kuruk's eyes directly. I saw their faces afterward. The Apache we'd killed. 1 of them was young, maybe 17, just a boy trying to feed his family. And I realized, standing there looking at him, that he'd been defending his home the same way I thought I was defending mine. The only difference was whose home the government decided mattered. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. I told the other settlers I was done, that I wouldn't track for them again. They called me a coward. Maybe I was. Maybe I just couldn't live with what I'd seen, what I'd done." He paused, swallowing hard. "Then in 1883 my wife died in childbirth. 18 hours of labor complications we couldn't fix, no doctor within 40 miles. She died, and the baby died with her. And I was left alone with blood on my hands and nothing in my heart but ash. I've lived alone ever since. 9 years of isolation, thinking it was penance, thinking if I stayed away from people I couldn't hurt anyone else. But isolation isn't penance. It's just cowardice dressed up as mourning." He looked at Kuruk again. "So yes, I killed your people. I helped kill them anyway. And if you want blood for blood, I understand. Maybe I deserve it." Kuruk was silent for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "What month was this raid?" 1881 July. Middle of July. "Why?" "What was the settler's name?" "The one who died." Sam's stomach dropped. "Thomas Mitchell." Why? Kuruk's face twisted with emotion, anger and grief and something more complicated. "Because I was in that fight. I was 17 winters old. It was my first real battle, my chance to prove myself as a warrior." His voice cracked slightly. "The young Apache you saw dead, the one you thought was 17, that was my cousin, Nashota. He hunts. He was teaching me to track, to hunt, to survive in the new world we were being forced into." The silence that fell over the arena was profound. Even the wind seemed to stop. Sam felt like he'd been punched in the chest, all the air leaving his lungs at once. "I found his body after the fight," Kuruk continued. "Held him while he grew cold. I was covered in his blood, and I swore I would kill every white man I met, make them all pay for what they'd taken from me." He looked at Sam with eyes that held a lifetime of pain. "I should kill you now. Every part of me wants to. But I listened to your story, and I hear something I didn't expect. I hear guilt. I hear regret. I hear a man who carries the same weight I carry, who lost family. Like I lost family, who lives with ghosts, like I live with ghosts." Kuruk sheathed his knife slowly. "You didn't kill for pleasure. You killed because you were afraid, because you thought you were defending your home. I killed settlers that day too. Shot Thomas Mitchell in the chest. Did that make me evil? Did that make you evil?" He shook his head. "We were enemies because we wanted the same land for different reasons. The land doesn't care who claims it, but people die for those claims." The young warrior's next words were directed at all the assembled Apache. "This man carries guilt in his eyes. I see it. He lost his family. We lost our families. He lives alone and haunted. Many of us live the same way. Killing him won't bring back Nashota. Won't bring back anyone. It will just add more death to a pile already too high." Kuruk extended his hand to Sam, not in the white man's way of shaking, but palm to palm, the warrior's grip of equals. "I don't forgive you. Maybe I never will. But I don't kill you either, because you are a reflection of me. We both killed. We both lost. We both carry scars that will never fully heal." Sam took the offered hand, feeling the strength in Kuruk's grip, the trembling that suggested how much this cost him. "Thank you," he said simply, because there were no words adequate for what had just happened. Cochilo had been silent throughout this entire exchange, watching, evaluating. Now he stepped forward and spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his 63 years and all the battles and losses they contained. Naiye translated her own voice, thick with emotion. "I have lived long enough to see much war. I have fought Americans, Mexicans, other tribes. I have killed many good men, fathers and sons who were not evil, but were enemies. For 300 years my people lived on this land. Then others came and said it was theirs. We fought. We are losing. My grandchildren will live on reservations confined to small pieces of the land that once was all ours. I know this. I cannot stop this." The chief looked at Sam with something that might have been respect. "When Naiye met you yesterday, I tested her. I wanted to know if all white men are the same, If all take, all kill, all lie. Today I learned no. Some white men carry pain like we carry pain. Some want peace like we want peace. Some regret, some change, some grow. Cochilo gestured to the old warrior who'd chanted during the first trial. Niol brought forward a leather cord with 3 stones threaded on it. White stone for endurance, red stone for wisdom, black stone for truth. The chief took the cord and tied it around Sam's wrist with his own hands, a gesture of profound significance. You are proven, Samuel Bridger. Not innocent, for you are not. Not forgiven, for some things cannot be forgiven. But honest, humble, and changed. Any Apache who sees these stones will know you were judged and found worthy of respect. Not enemy, not friend, but respected. The warriors struck their chests in that salute again, and this time even Kuruk joined them, his fist hitting his chest with genuine force. Nai embraced Sam suddenly, shocking everyone, including herself, crossing a cultural boundary that made the warriors gasp. But Cochilo didn't object, and that non-objection was its own form of approval. The sun was setting now, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. Cochilo spoke again. Tonight we ride to your cabin. We will feast. Tomorrow you are free to return to your life. But if you wish, you could stay. Learn our ways, teach us yours. Be a bridge between our peoples. You have earned that right. Sam looked at the 3 stones on his wrist, feeling their weight. I need time to think about that. But before anyone could respond, a young voice cut through the moment, high and clear and completely unexpected. Did you stay, Grandpa? Did you stay with them? The canyon dissolved like morning mist, and Sam was no longer 40 years old, standing in the sacred valley, but 68 years old, sitting on his porch in New Mexico in 1920 with his 10-year-old grandson Tommy looking up at him with wide, eager eyes. Sam blinked, the transition jarring, the memories so vivid he could still feel the heat of that Arizona sun, the weight of those 3 stones being tied around his wrist for the first time. He smiled at Tommy, the smile of an old man who'd lived long enough to know how complicated the answers to simple questions could be. Well now, he said, his voice rough with emotion and age. That's a longer story than you might think, boy. Pour me some water and I'll tell you the rest. Tommy scrambled to pour water from the clay pitcher on the porch table, his small hands careful not to spill a drop. He handed the cup to his grandfather with the solemnity of someone participating in a ritual he didn't fully understand but knew was important. Sam took a long drink, the cool water bringing him fully back to the present, to 1920, to the porch of the small house in New Mexico where he'd lived for the past 15 years. So, did you stay with them? Grandpa Tommy asked again, settling back into his chair, his eyes bright with curiosity. Did you become Apache? Sam chuckled, a dry sound like wind through autumn leaves. That's the question, isn't it? Did I stay or did I go? The answer is, I did both and neither. Life isn't as simple as stories make it sound, boy. He turned the cup in his hands, watching the water catch the morning light. Let me tell you what happened next. The transition back to 1892 was smoother this time, like slipping into a familiar coat. Sam could feel the memory settle over him, could see it as clearly as if he were living it again. The ride back to his cabin that evening was different from the journey out. Sam rode at the front of the formation, now positioned between Chief Cochilo and Nai, no longer a prisoner, but not quite a guest either. Something in between, something they didn't have a word for in English or Apache. The warriors had given him a proper saddle and bridle, small gestures of respect that meant more than any words could have. Nai rode close enough that conversation was possible, though for the first hour she said nothing. Sam understood she was processing what had happened, recalibrating her understanding of him, and perhaps of herself. Finally, as the sun sank lower and painted the desert in shades of orange and purple, she spoke. You surprised everyone today. Including yourself, I think. Sam considered that. Including myself, he agreed. I didn't know what I was going to say until the words came out. Especially with your father's knife. That answer could have gotten me killed. It nearly did. Nai's voice was quiet. My father has never offered for an outsider to stay with us, not in all his years as chief. You are the first white man he has ever called proven. What does that mean exactly? Staying with you. Nai was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. It would mean learning our ways, our language, our customs, our understanding of how to live in this land without destroying it. It would mean teaching our young warriors about white tactics, helping them understand the enemy they face. She glanced at him. We are losing this war, Samuel Bridger. We know it. The government wants all Apache on reservations by 1895. 3 more years and our freedom ends. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. My father wants to lose with dignity, to keep our culture alive even in captivity, to give our children tools to survive in the world that is coming. You could help with that. You understand both worlds. You could be a bridge. Sam thought about his cabin, about 12 years of solitude, about the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and everything that could hurt him. And I would do what exactly? Live in your camp. Give up my land. You would keep your cabin, keep your land. But you would also have a wiki up in our camp. You would move between both worlds, belonging fully to neither, but connected to both. Nai's dark eyes studied him. My father is old. He has maybe 5 more winters. He needs someone who can negotiate with the Indian agent, who understands white law and white thinking, but who the Apache trust. Someone who has been proven. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sam's shoulders like a physical burden. I'm 40 years old, set in my ways. Can I really learn a new language, new customs, become someone different than who I've been? You already became someone different today, Nai pointed out. The man who stood in that valley was not the same man who rode past the Williams family 5 years ago. Change is not betraying your past. It is honoring it by becoming better. They arrived at Sam's cabin as twilight deepened into night. The warriors who had seemed so threatening that morning now set about making camp with practiced efficiency, building a large fire for celebration rather than siege. Women arrived separately, having ridden a different path, bringing cooking pots and blankets and supplies for a feast. Sam watched them work and noticed something he'd never seen in white settlements: the way men and women worked together, distinct roles, but equal respect, decisions made in conversation rather than command. His cabin looked different to him now, smaller, somehow more fragile. He'd built it as a fortress against the world walls, thick enough to keep out heat and people and pain. Tonight it felt less like protection and more like a prison he'd built for himself. The feast that followed was unlike anything Sam had experienced. Food was shared communally, passed around the fire in careful order, elders first, then proven warriors, then younger men, and everyone ate exactly their share, no more and no less. Coffee was a rare luxury, and Sam's contribution of his supply from Wilcox was greeted with genuine appreciation. Young warriors crowding around to learn how he made it over an open fire. Old Niol, the warrior who'd chanted during the first trial, sat beside Sam and spoke in broken English. You did well, white man. I am 67 winters. I was proven at 23. You are 40 proven today. Different paths, same destination. He shared his story of being captured by Mexican soldiers at 19, escaping and being tested when he returned to prove he hadn't betrayed the tribe. I passed like you passed. We are brothers in survival now. Kuruk approached later, still radiating tension but no longer hostile. I don't like you, old man, he said bluntly. But I respect you. You didn't beg for your life. You didn't lie about what you did. You faced truth even when truth could kill you. That is warrior behavior. He paused, struggling with something internal. I'm sorry about your wife. About your loss. I'm sorry about your cousin, Sam replied. About Nashota. Sorry doesn't bring them back, but maybe acknowledging the loss helps carry it. Kuruk nodded slowly, as if Sam had passed one more test he hadn't known he was taking. But it was Nai who brought Sam a special portion of the meal, roasted rabbit heart wrapped in corn husks. In our culture, she explained quietly, the heart is given to the honored guest. It means you have earned our heart's trust, that we see you as worthy of our most vulnerable selves. She hesitated, then added something that seemed more personal than cultural. You gave me back my mother's knife. I give you this symbolic heart. We are connected now, whether we choose it or not." Sam took the offering with hands that trembled slightly. Understanding this was more than food, more than gesture. It was a promise of protection, of belonging, of being seen in a way he hadn't been seen since Margaret died. As the night deepened and most of the warriors drifted toward sleep, Cochillo gestured for Sam to walk with him away from the fire. Nayi followed to translate her presence, a bridge between two men who spoke different languages but were beginning to understand each other. The chief's proposal was straightforward. Stay for 3 moons, learn from us, teach us, help negotiate with the Indian agent when the time comes. Be an advisor, a bridge person. After 3 moons, if it doesn't work, leave with no shame. But if it does work, consider staying longer. Consider becoming something neither fully white nor fully Apache, but something new that this changing world needs. Sam's hesitation must have shown on his face because Cochillo added through Nayi's translation, "I am old. I have maybe 5 winters left. I need someone who understands both sides of the conflict that is destroying my people. You understand loss. You understand survival at terrible cost. You understand what it means to carry guilt and try to become better despite it." The chief's weathered face was hard to read in the firelight, but Sam heard genuine need in his voice. "The American government will force all Apache onto reservations soon. We will lose. But I want to lose with dignity, to preserve what can be preserved, to give my grandchildren some thread of connection to who we were. You can help with that. Or you can return to your cabin and die alone in 20 years wondering if your life meant anything." It was the most brutally honest assessment anyone had ever given Sam, and he respected Cochillo for not softening it. "Let me sleep on it," Sam said. "I'll give you an answer in the morning." The chief nodded. "Good. Think carefully. This is not a small decision." Sam spent the night by the dying fire after everyone else had found their sleeping places. His mind churned with possibilities and fears. Arguments against staying were numerous and compelling. He was 40 years old, too old to learn a new language fluently, too set in his patterns to truly adapt to a radically different culture. He'd killed Apache warriors, would always be an outsider, would never fully belong. White society would call him a traitor, an Indian lover, and he'd be shunned by his own people. Apache society would always see him as the white man, would never fully trust him, no matter what he did. But the arguments for staying were simpler and somehow more powerful. What did he have if he returned to his solitary life? Nothing. 12 years of isolation hadn't made him happy, hadn't healed the wound of Margaret's death, hadn't given his life meaning or purpose. Today, standing in that sacred valley, passing those trials, he'd felt more alive than he had since 1883. These people had tested him, truly tested him, and found him worthy. They had seen him at his worst and his best, and decided he was worth something. And there was Nayi, who needed an ally in her struggle to prove herself capable of leadership. And Cochillo, who needed a bridge to navigate the impossible situation of trying to preserve a culture that was being systematically destroyed. And even Kuruk, who'd found a way to honor his cousin's memory by choosing connection over vengeance. Sam imagined Margaret sitting beside him the way she used to on Tennessee nights before the war came and destroyed everything. "What would you want me to do?" he asked the empty air. Her voice came from memory, patient and wise. "I'd want you to live, Samuel. Not just exist. Live, connect, matter, be part of something larger than your own grief." By the time the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, Sam had made his decision. He stood, stretched muscles that ached from yesterday's ordeal, and walked to where Cochillo was already awake, sitting cross-legged and watching the dawn. Sam didn't need words. He simply knelt and held out his wrist, the one bearing the 3 stones, in a gesture of commitment. Cochillo looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. A sharp, decisive movement that sealed the agreement. "Good," the chief said in English, one of the few English words he knew. "We begin today." But as Sam stood and turned to face this new chapter of his life, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A rider in the distance coming fast. Even from half a mile away, the blue uniform was unmistakable. U.S. Cavalry. And trouble as always seemed to find Sam even when he chose peace. Back on the porch in 1920, old Sam took another sip of water and smiled at Tommy's rapt expression. That cavalry rider was Lieutenant Hayes from Fort Apache. He saw all those Apache around my cabin and thought I was being held hostage, thought he needed to rescue me. Instead, I had to rescue him from starting a battle that would have gotten everyone killed. What happened? Tommy leaned forward, unable to contain his excitement. I stood between the cavalry and the Apache, Sam said quietly. Made myself a bridge, literally not just figuratively. Told Hayes these people were here peacefully, that they were leaving in the morning, that no one needed to die that day. He didn't want to listen at first. Young officer fresh from West Point, all full of certainty about who was right and who was wrong. But I convinced him to give me 24 hours. Told him I'd escort the Apache back toward the reservation personally, that I'd take responsibility. He agreed reluctantly and rode off to watch from a distance. That night I realized this is what my life would be now if I stayed. Standing between two sides that wanted to kill each other, trying to find the narrow space where peace could exist. Did you stay? Tommy asked for what felt like the 100th time, and Sam laughed. I did, boy. I stayed 3 months like I promised, then 3 more, then 3 years. Learned Apache language, customs, ways of thinking. Helped negotiate better terms when they went to the reservation. Wasn't much, but it was something. Got them better rations, better land for farming, got some of the children into school. And then in 1897, 5 years after that day in the valley, I met your grandmother. Mary was Nye's cousin, sharp as a knife and twice as beautiful. She saw something in this old, scarred white man that he couldn't see in himself. We married in 1898, had your father that same year. She paused, emotion thick in his throat. So you, Tommy, you're part of this story. You carry both bloods in your veins. You're the bridge I became made flesh. Tommy looked down at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I'm part Apache. Like really? 1/4, Sam confirmed. Does that bother you? Tommy thought about it seriously, the way only a 10-year-old could, without the prejudices that adults carried like invisible chains. No, he said finally. I think it's good. It means I'm a bridge too, like you said. It means I'm connected to more than just one way of seeing the world. Sam felt tears prick his eyes, surprised by them but not ashamed. That's exactly right, boy. That's what I hoped you'd understand. What happened to Nye? Tommy asked. And Chief Cochillo. And Kuruk. Sam's face grew somber. Cochillo died in 1894, natural causes, but his heart was broken by seeing his people confined to reservations. Nye married a good man in 1896, not for alliance but for love, and I was honored to attend the wedding. She had 3 children before she died in 1918, just 2 years ago. Kuruk died in 1898 in a small skirmish with settlers who tried to push Apache off even the reservation land. He went down fighting, which I think is how he would have wanted it. And old Neol, Tommy asked, remembering the name from the story. Sam smiled. Neol lived to be 73. Died in 1905 with me holding his hand just like he held mine through the first trial. He made me promise to tell his story to make sure people knew that being proven wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest enough to admit your flaws and strong enough to change despite them. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the New Mexico morning. Tommy sat quietly processing everything he'd heard, and Sam let the silence stretch. These weren't the kind of stories you rushed. They needed time to settle, to find their place in a young mind that was still learning how the world worked. Finally, Tommy asked one more question, the most important one. Grandpa, do you think you made the right choice? Staying with them, becoming a bridge. Sam looked out at the desert, stretching to the horizon, at the land that had tested him and changed him and ultimately given his life meaning when he'd thought all meaning was lost. He touched the 3 stones on his wrist, worn smooth by 28 years of constant wear, and smiled. Yes, he said simply. I made the right choice. Not the easy choice, but the right one. I could have stayed in my cabin and died alone at 50, bitter and isolated, and convinced the world was nothing but pain. Instead, I lived to 68, connected and purposeful, and part of something larger than myself. I helped hundreds of Apache navigate an impossible situation. I raised a son who married an Apache woman. I have a grandson who carries both bloods and sees that as a strength rather than a weakness. He reached over and ruffled Tommy's hair. That's legacy, boy. Not the stones on my wrist or the stories I tell. You. The fact that you exist, that you're listening to this story and understanding what it means, that's what made those 3 trials worth surviving. Tommy sat in thoughtful silence after hearing about Lieutenant Hayes and the cavalry encounter. The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the New Mexico porch where 2 generations sat connected by stones and stories. His grandfather's weathered hand still rested on the armrest, the 3 stones catching the light with each small movement. "Grandpa," Tommy said, finally breaking the comfortable quiet that had settled between them. "What happened after Lieutenant Hayes came? You said you promised to escort them back. Did you?" Sam nodded slowly, his eyes distant with memory. "I did. The next morning I rode with them toward the Fort Apache reservation. Spent 2 weeks there talking to the Indian agent, a man named Wilkins, who was more interested in his own comfort than in the welfare of the people he was supposed to serve. I argued for better rations, for land suitable for farming, for teachers who would respect Apache culture while teaching English and arithmetic. Did it work? Some. Sam's voice was heavy with the memory of partial victories and larger defeats. Got them better flour, real beef instead of spoiled meat. Got a promise of a school that would let Apache children learn their own language alongside English. It wasn't much, but it was something. Every small victory mattered when you were fighting a war you knew you'd already lost. He shifted in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. I went back to my cabin after those 2 weeks thinking maybe that was it, maybe I'd fulfilled my obligation. But a week later, Nai showed up at my door. Her father wanted me to return, wanted me to stay the 3 months I'd agreed to. So I went back. What was it like? Living with them. Sam's eyes grew distant, seeing across decades to those months of transformation. Hard. Everything was different. The language was nothing like English, all clicks and flowing sounds I couldn't get my tongue around at first. The customs were complex rules about who could speak to whom, when to be silent, how to show respect. I made mistakes, constantly embarrassed myself, felt like a child learning to walk. But they were patient, especially the older people. Neol took me under his wing, taught me tracking techniques I'd never imagined. How to read the desert like a book, every disturbed stone and bent blade of grass telling a story. How to find water where none seemed to exist. How to navigate by stars and wind and the shape of distant mountains. He paused, remembering. And Nai, she taught me their language every evening by the fire. We'd sit for hours, her pointing to objects and speaking their names, me repeating them badly until she'd laugh and correct me. Sometimes Cochilo would join us, and through our broken conversations, I began to understand his mind, his fears for his people, his determination to preserve what could be preserved. The 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Sam's voice grew softer. I was splitting my time between my cabin and their camp, living in both worlds, belonging fully to neither. White settlers in Wilcox started treating me differently, calling me Indian lover, Apache sympathizer. I'd go to buy supplies and people would turn away, refuse to do business with me. Lost most of my old neighbors, people I'd defended alongside back in '81. Did that hurt, Tommy asked. Sam considered the question. Less than I thought it would. By then I'd found something more valuable than their approval. I'd found purpose. I'd found people who'd tested me and found me worthy. That mattered more than whether Henry Thompson would sell me flour without spitting in it first. In 1895, the government order came. All Apache were to report to reservations immediately. No more free-ranging, no more traditional life. Cochilo gathered his people, and I stood beside him when he made the decision to comply. It broke something in him, that surrender. He was 58 years old, the same age I'd been during the proving, and I watched him age a decade in a single day. We walked onto the reservation together. Sam continued, his voice rough with old grief. 400 people giving up everything they'd known, everything their ancestors had known, to live in wooden houses on land that couldn't support them. Cochilo lasted one more year, died in his sleep in 1894, and I was there at his burial. They let me participate in the ceremony even though I wasn't Apache because he'd requested it before he died. Said I'd earned the right to mourn with his family. Sam wiped at his eyes, not ashamed of the tears. Naiyi took over much of the leadership after that, though she could never be chief formally. But people listened to her, respected her judgment. She'd been proven right about me, about trusting an outsider, and that gave her voice weight. She married in '96, had 3 beautiful children. I watched them grow, taught them to read and write English while their mother taught them Apache traditions. And Grandma Mary, when did you meet her? Sam's face brightened slightly at the memory. 1897. She was Naiyi's cousin visiting from a different band that had been moved to the same reservation. 28 years old, never married, sharp-tongued and sharper-minded. She saw me trying to help some of the children with arithmetic, getting frustrated because the language barrier was making simple math impossible to explain. She walked over, took the stick I'd been using to draw numbers in the dirt, and explained the concept in Apache so clearly the children understood immediately. He chuckled. Then she turned to me and said in perfect English, "You're Sam Bridger, the white man who was proven. My cousin speaks highly of you, though I can't imagine why. You're too old, too serious, and you don't smile nearly enough." I stood there with my mouth open, couldn't think of a single thing to say. She just laughed and walked away. Tommy grinned. "Did you smile more after that?" I had to. She made sure of it. Sam's voice was warm with affection. Took me 6 months to work up the courage to court her properly by both Apache and white customs. Married in spring of 1898, and your father was born that December. We had a good life together, Mary and I. 20 years before she passed in 1918. Influenza epidemic swept through the reservation like wildfire. She was 50 when she died, but we'd had 2 decades of happiness. That's more than many people get. Tommy was quiet again, processing. Then why did you leave the reservation? Why are we here in New Mexico instead of Arizona? The reservation changed, Sam said simply. After Naiyi died in 1918, after Mary died the same year, there wasn't much holding me there anymore. Your father was grown, had married your mother, wanted to make his own way. The young people on the reservation, they didn't remember the old times, didn't understand why this old white man with 3 stones on his wrist mattered. To them I was just another relic of a past they were trying to forget. He gestured to the small house behind them. So I came here. Bought this land legally, no homesteading, no claiming what wasn't mine. Just a simple purchase from a widow who needed to sell. Your father brought you to visit twice a year, and that was enough. I didn't need to be at the center of things anymore. I'd done my part. Built my bridges, left my legacy in people like your father and you. Grandpa Tommy said hesitantly. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? Stopping to help Naiyi that day, Sam was quiet for a long time, looking out at the desert that had defined so much of his life. Finally he spoke, choosing each word carefully. I regret the pain. I regret that I couldn't do more, couldn't prevent the injustices that happened anyway. I regret every person I couldn't help, every time I stood between 2 sides and failed to find common ground. I regret Margaret's death and the years I wasted in isolation afterward. But regret stopping to help Naiyi. Regret being proven. Regret the life I built after that day. He shook his head firmly. No. Never. That choice, that single moment of deciding to help a stranger, led to everything good that came after. It led to me learning a language and a culture I never would have known. It led to me meeting Mary. It led to your father, which led to you. He reached over and took Tommy's small hand in his weathered one. You exist because I stopped that day, because I chose connection over isolation. That makes every trial, every hardship, every moment of being caught between two worlds worth it. You're my legacy, boy. You and your father and every person whose life was even slightly better because I chose to be a bridge instead of a wall." Tommy squeezed his grandfather's hand, understanding in the way children sometimes can, seeing past the words to the truth beneath. "Will you give me the stones when you die?" "Like you said." Sam nodded. "They're yours. But remember, they're not magic. They don't make you proven. They're just a reminder of what being proven means. It means being tested and choosing honesty over comfort. It means admitting you don't know everything while still taking action. It means understanding that you're not the same person you were yesterday, and you don't have to be the same person tomorrow." "What test will I face?" Tommy asked, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. "I don't know," Sam admitted, "but I know this. When it comes, you'll recognize it. It'll be the moment when the easy choice and the right choice aren't the same thing, when what you want and what you should do pull in opposite directions. That's your proving moment. And when it comes, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that your grandfather stood in a canyon with 400 warriors ready to kill him and chose truth anyway." Tommy nodded solemnly, and Sam saw in the boy's eyes that the story had taken root, that it would grow with him, shape him, guide him when his own moment of testing came. They sat together in comfortable silence as the morning stretched into afternoon. Eventually, Tommy's mother called from inside, saying it was time for lunch, and the boy reluctantly stood to go. But he paused at the door, looking back at his grandfather. "I'm proud to be part Apache," he said quietly. "I'm proud to be your grandson. I'm proud to be a bridge." Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Good boy. Now go eat before your mother comes out here and gives us both a scolding." Tommy laughed and disappeared inside, leaving Sam alone on the porch with his memories and his 3 stones. He held his wrist up to the light, watching the sun catch the edges of the white stone, the red stone, the black stone. 28 years of constant wear had smoothed them until they were almost featureless, but their meanings hadn't diminished. Endurance, wisdom, truth, the 3 pillars that had held up his life since that day in 1892. Sam stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement, and walked to the old shed behind the house. Inside was a trunk he kept locked, containing the artifacts of his years as a bridge between worlds. He opened it carefully, reverently, and looked at the contents in the dusty light filtering through the shed's single window. The Winchester rifle he'd leaned against the wall that morning, choosing vulnerability over violence. Cochillo's knife given to Sam in 1893 with a ceremony that had honored him as family. Nai's turquoise bracelet, a gift from her wedding day. Photographs from the early 1900s, grainy and faded, but still showing Apache families standing proud despite everything they'd lost. And Sam, among them, no longer quite white, not quite Apache, but undeniably part of their story. There was a journal, 2 leather-bound, and filled with Sam's careful handwriting. He'd started it in 1892 at Nai's suggestion, recording everything he learned, every story the elders told him, every custom and tradition he witnessed. She'd told him that one day these things would be forgotten if no one wrote them down, that the old ways would disappear, like water into sand. The journal was his attempt to preserve what he could, knowing it would never be complete, but hoping it would be enough. Sam pulled out the journal now and flipped to a page near the end, an entry from March 1920, just a few weeks ago. He read his own words written in a hand that had grown shakier with age. "I am 68 years old now. I feel death approaching like a visitor I've been expecting for years. My body is failing, my memory sometimes slips, and I wake most mornings uncertain whether the day ahead is worth the effort of living through it. But then I think about Tommy, about the way he looks at these stones on my wrist with wonder and curiosity. I think about the story I need to tell him before I die, the legacy I need to pass on. Being proven wasn't about those 3 trials in the canyon, though they mattered. It was about every day, after every choice to stay connected, instead of withdrawing, every moment of standing between two worlds and refusing to let either one destroy the other. It was about learning that change is possible at any age, that 40 is not too old to become someone different, that loss doesn't have to mean the end of living. If I die tomorrow, I die knowing I mattered. Not because I was perfect or heroic or special, but because I showed up. I stopped for a stranger. I faced trials I didn't think I could survive. I chose truth when lies would have been easier. I built bridges when walls would have been simpler. And in doing so, I created a legacy that will outlive me by generations. Tommy carries my blood and Mary's blood and the blood of people who lived on this land for 300 years before white men arrived. He is living proof that bridges are possible, that connection is stronger than division, that the future doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. That is what being proven means. Not proving yourself once, but proving every day that you can be better than you were, that you can choose growth over stagnation, connection over isolation, truth over comfortable lies. When I give Tommy these 3 stones, I will tell him they are heavy. Not because of the stones themselves, but because of what they represent. The responsibility to be honest, the burden of wisdom, the weight of endurance. But I will also tell him they are a gift, because they remind us that we are capable of more than we believe, that we can survive tests we think will break us, that we can change in ways that transform not just ourselves, but everyone we touch. Sam closed the journal and placed it back in the trunk, along with all the other artifacts of a life lived between worlds. Someday soon, maybe this year or next, Tommy would inherit all of this. The trunk would become his responsibility, these stories, his burden, and his gift. And Sam trusted that the boy would carry them forward, would understand their weight, and their worth would become his own kind of bridge for his own time. He locked the trunk and walked back to the house, where he could hear Tommy laughing at something his mother had said, the sound bright and uncomplicated in the way only children's laughter could be. Sam paused at the door, listening, memorizing the sound. This was what he'd fought for, what he'd endured for. Not grand victories or historical recognition, but the simple sound of his grandson laughing in a house that held 3 generations of bridge builders. That evening, after Tommy and his parents had left to return to their own home, Sam sat alone on the porch again, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky turned purple and orange and red colors bleeding together like watercolors on wet paper. And Sam thought about all the sunsets he'd watched from this porch, from his old cabin in Arizona, from the Apache camps in the mountains, from the reservation. He touched the 3 stones on his wrist one more time, a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing over the past 28 years. White for endurance. He'd endured loss and loneliness and the slow dismantling of everything he'd thought was permanent. Red for wisdom. He'd learned that wisdom wasn't about having answers, but about asking better questions, about understanding complexity instead of seeking simplicity. Black for truth. He'd discovered that truth was sometimes brutal and sometimes beautiful, and always necessary, even when it cost everything. The stones had marked him as proven to the Apache, but they'd also marked him as proven to himself. They were a daily reminder that he'd been tested and hadn't broken, that he'd chosen the harder path and survived it, that he'd become someone worth remembering. As darkness settled over New Mexico and stars began to prick the deepening blue above, Sam whispered words into the night. Words meant for people who were long dead, but whom he still carried with him every day. Margaret, I hope I made you proud. I hope the man I became was closer to the man you believed I could be. Cochilo, I tried to honor our agreement. I tried to be the bridge you needed. I'm sorry I couldn't save more. Nayi, thank you for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for testing me and for trusting me, and for teaching me that family isn't just blood. Mary, I miss you every day. Thank you for 20 years of happiness, for showing me that love was possible after I thought I'd lost the capacity for it forever. And to all of you who are gone now, who lived through those years of change and loss and fought to preserve what you could, I want you to know that your stories didn't die with you. I'm telling them to Tommy, and he'll tell them to his children, and the thread will continue. That's what being proven means in the end. Not just surviving the trials, but passing the lessons forward so that others can survive theirs. Sam sat on the porch until the cold drove him inside, and even then he moved slowly, reluctant to leave the night and the memories it held. He climbed into bed with the ache of old joints and older wounds, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and closed his eyes. He dreamed that night of the canyon of standing tied to that post with the sun burning down and 400 warriors watching. But in the dream, Margaret was there too, and Cochilo and Nayi and Mary and all the people who had shaped him and tested him and ultimately saved him from the loneliness that would have killed him more surely than any arrow. They stood in a circle around him, and they were smiling, and their smiles said, "You did well. You endured. You were proven. And your proving made all the difference." When Sam Bridger died 3 months later, peacefully in his sleep with the morning sun streaming through his window, the 3 stones were still on his wrist. Tommy inherited them as promised, along with the trunk full of stories and the responsibility of remembering. And on a spring day in 1920, a 10-year-old boy became the keeper of a legacy that stretched back to a moment in 1892 when a 40-year-old widower chose to stop and help a stranger, and in doing so changed the course of his life and the lives of everyone who came after. The stones passed to Tommy. The stories lived on. The bridge endured. And that in the end was what it meant to be proven. Not the trials themselves, but what you built with the life those trials gave you. Not the moment of testing, but the decades of choices that followed. Not the honor of being called worthy, but the responsibility of living as if you were. This was Samuel Bridger's legacy. This was his gift. This was his story, complete at last, told to a grandson who would carry it forward into a future Sam would never see but had helped create. And in the telling and the passing of 3 small stones from one generation to the next, the proving continued as it always would, as long as there were people willing to choose the harder path, to speak difficult truths, to build bridges instead of walls. The end was also a beginning. And the stones worn smooth by time and touch and tears waited patiently to mark another proving, another test, another life transformed by the choice to be better than yesterday, to endure what seems unendurable, and to remember that we are never too old, never too broken, never too lost to change.